On Wednesday, July 29, 2020, a frantic 000 call would be placed by a man out walking his dog in bushland around Sandy Point Quarry off the Heathcote Road in Menai, 30 kilometres south of Sydney. The walker had found the partially charred remains of a young woman some 800 metres from the roadside in the Sutherland Shire. Crime scene investigators from New South Wales Police descended on the scene. A gruesome discovery, a suspicious death. Within hours, a press release would confirm the death was being treated as suspicious by homicide detectives. Area Commander Superintendent Steve Patton confirmed to assembled media the remnants of a fire near the scene were observed by police and burn injuries covered the victim's body. Within 24 hours, New South Wales Police had a positive ID of the deceased. 33-year-old Najma Carroll, most recently living in Sydney's inner west, a young woman with a checkered history of homelessness, alcohol and drug abuse, the victim of what New South Wales Police Homicide Squad Detective Superintendent Danny Doherty described as a truly horrific crime, with the deceased struck multiple times, causing significant head injuries, before her body was set on fire in an effort to conceal any evidence of the crime. As Najma Carroll's mother sought to come to terms with the body in the bushland being her own flesh and blood, emotional tributes were paid to a beloved daughter, a loving, generous and courageous spirit. As police inquiries mounted, establishing motive for Carroll's death, securing evidence and apprehending those responsible would become the daily fixation of a small band of homicide detectives and local Sutherland Shire Police Department. As a painstaking investigation ensued, police uncovered a criminal duo of considerable interest to detectives. A duo familiar with organised crime and with long-standing outlaw biker group connections. Both having done hard time before, the two had a history of ice, cocaine and methamphetamine deals, intimidation, extortion, assault, grand theft auto, breaking and entering, with charges spanning multiple years and many offences. You're watching Pacific Crime TV. Please remember to subscribe, like and enable notifications so you never miss a new release, providing you insight on the shocking murders, underworld hits and organised crime groups shaking our cities. Chapter 1. Timeline to Tragedy. In the days following Carroll's premature death, crime scene investigators concluded the autopsy that provided harrowing insight into Najma's final hours. Of immediate significance was the estimated time of death. Forensics relayed to investigators that Carroll had died approximately 2 weeks prior to her remains discovery. The autopsy had proved inconclusive in defining Carroll's cause of death due to the burnt remains and subsequent decomposition. The autopsy did, however, show signs of some defensive wounds across Carroll's hands and arms as she fought for her life. Tragically, that was all in vain. Carroll had suffered severe trauma to the head, her cranium shattered into a horrific 62 fragments, consistent with repeated blunt force trauma. Police knew those responsible had a 2-week head start on investigators. It was conceivable they may have fled interstate, even overseas. But on August 3rd, investigators would catch a break. A blue 2000 Mercedes SUV was found burnt out in close proximity to where Carroll's remains were found. Subsequent investigations found Carroll had purchased the vehicle around a month prior to her death for $3,700. The vehicle was recovered and searched for clues. Had Carroll been lured to her own death? Automatic number plate recognition cameras and good old-fashioned police work would soon give detectives an insight into the chaos engulfing Carroll's life in the lead-up to her killing, and uncover the identity of persons of interest. Chapter 2. Deal Me In. Police discovered May 1st, 2020, that Carol withdrew $8,500 from her superannuation fund under the COVID-19 early release scheme. Carol, who was at the time unemployed, used the funds to rent a white 2018 Hyundai i30 from a car rental firm in Artarmon. The vehicle was due to be returned on June 8, 2020, but Miss Carol and an associate, Hamad Al-Shamir, aka Ali, had argued at a property in Colleton in Sydney's west in the days before. Police learned Ali threatened Carol, demanding the keys to her rental vehicle before fleeing the premises in the car. The vehicle was never returned to Ms. Carol. Fearful of harm by Ali, Najma renewed the leases on the rental even after purchasing the blue Mercedes SUV later found burnt out near her remains. On June 26th, the same day Carol bought her new wheels, she checked into the Hunts Hotel in Casula. On checking in, Carol met Benjamin Parks, a drug dealer with a penchant for escorts staying at the hotel. Parks had been at Hunt's Hotel for a little over a week before meeting Carol and was a known distributor of crystal methamphetamine or ice, cocaine and cannabis. Carol, a habitual and vulnerable drug user with fresh funds, quickly fell into Parks' vice. Alongside feeding Carol's addiction, Parks spotted an opportunity to manipulate her. Promising to give her a percentage of the profits from his drug supply ring in return for an $8,000 investment, Carol agreed, and the money was withdrawn from a St. George's Bank at Carnes Hill. Parks, flush with additional funds, secured additional quantities of drugs from his upline to sell on the Sydney streets. As the sales rolled in, Parks initially paid back Carol, but police would later discover this profit share did not last long. Just 24 hours after Parks and Carol entered into business, a 57-year-old man named Robert Sloan checked into the Hunts Hotel. Sloan, nicknamed Pockets, was a then 57-year-old with a long record of drug abuse and a street dealer in Sydney's west. Parks and Sloan hit it off. Both ex-bikies, both members of outlaw motorcycle gangs. They had spent time behind bars and both were actors in the drug supply business. Despite only just meeting, Parks picked up Sloan's accommodation tab. In return, Sloan began working as a pusher for Parks. Carol became a taxi, her new vehicle ferrying the men to illicit drug deals across Sydney's southwest. Over the weeks ensuing, Carol, who by now was receiving no kickback on her investment in the scheme, was becoming increasingly agitated. Despite this, she changed rooms in the hotel to be housed on the same floor as Parks and Sloan. Indeed, up until July 11, 2020, the homicide squad uncovered a bounty of evidence linking the three parties together, comprising phone calls, texts, ANPR footage, and witness testimonies. Police even discovered Parks had spent 4 days travelling interstate to undertake a drug deal in Western Australia. Sloan safeguarded his room at the hotel during his absence, dealing ice from Carol's own Mercedes. Meanwhile, interstate, Benjamin Parks was in a pickle. On July 10, 2020, shortly before 2 a.m, Mr. Parks and his upline, who later flipped as a witness for the prosecution, were stopped by South Australian police at the New South Wales border. Police searched the vehicle and located $17,380 in cash, but did not locate ice hidden beneath the centre console. Police seized the cash. A baseball bat observed in the back seat was not seized. Parks and the co-conspirator were denied entry to South Australia. A furious, penniless Parks doubled back towards Sydney with mounting problems. By mid-morning, July 11th, Parks was back. Sloan was called and told to meet Parks and the upline at a nondescript residential address on the corner of Rossmore and Bringeley. Parks confided with the men that Carol was becoming an increasing nuisance. She wanted her money back quickly, knew too much about the drug dealing operation, and had gone to the police about the Hyundai car stolen by the associate Ali in the weeks prior. Carol filed a report on July 3rd at the city's Fairfield police station, with the vehicle later seized. Parks wanted to keep all the money and was unwilling to give Carol her money back. Parks and Sloan resorted to having a blowout to forget about their financial woes for a moment. Rather than shifting their own product, the duo were binging on it. Increasingly erratic, paranoid and now moneyless, the muscled mules had a decision to make. Najma Carroll was caught up in an escalating enterprise, and her involvement with the pushers would have deadly consequences. Chapter 3. Murder in Menai. Around 4 p.m. on the same day, July 11th, Sloan returned to the Hunts Hotel, driving Carol's Mercedes. On exiting the vehicle, he removed items including a hammer, a baseball bat, a yellow jerry can, accessories, and a duffel bag from the boot, and placed them onto the balcony of Parks' room. Some 90 minutes later, Parks returned. He hunted out Carol, told her to grab her belongings and get in the car. By 6:15 p.m., Parks was staked outside Carol's room. The vulnerable woman, panic-stricken, hurriedly left her room carrying a khaki bag, a small black bag, and items of clothing. Parks placed a call to Sloan. He departed the Hunts Hotel alone at 7:20 p.m. Minutes later, Carol and Parks were observed on CCTV climbing into the crew cab of Parks' Toyota Hilux. Carol's Mercedes remained in the hotel parking lot. It would be the last time she stayed at the Hunts Hotel. Later that evening, Carol, Parks, and the upline ate a Chinese meal at a Cabramatta restaurant before they continued to the upline's abode in Smithfield. Carol was then locked up and held hostage in the garage of the upline. In a twisted sequence of events, the young woman was held for around 48 hours over the weekend until Sloan eventually picked her up around 2:30 a.m. on the morning of July 14th. But as Carol lay hostage, chaos was beginning to ensue at the Hunts Hotel. On Sunday, July 12th, 2020, at about 10:40 a.m., Sloan texted Parks stating, "Ben, I am about to get booted out of here. I don't know where to buy. I will talk to you later about what I still owe you for the car. Don't worry, I pay my debts. Pockets." Parks paid to extend the rooms for Sloan and Carol and himself in cash. Parks' ex-girlfriend and 3 children visited him at the hotel the same day. Sloan spent various intervals of that day in the presence of Parks' family. As day turned to night, Sloan climbed over the balcony to Carol's room carrying a bag. Approximately 30 seconds later, Sloan would return across the balcony and entered Carol's room with no sign of the bag. Sloan, an indebted hired hand, was doing Parks' dirty work. Around 6:50 p.m, the duo were caught on CCTV. Parks carried a white plastic bag from Miss Carol's room. Neither he nor his ex-partner had carried it into the room when they entered at 6:05 p.m. Parks informed Sloan to get rid of the bag's contents. Parks and Sloan then left the Hunts Hotel together at about 8:30 p.m. and drove to the upline's address in Smithfield. They arrived at Smithfield at 9:05 p.m. and remained for around 90 minutes. Carol continued to be held against her will. Monday, July 13th, 2020, would prove to be no less frantic. The men undertook a series of transits that afternoon from the Casula Hotel to Smithfield, keeping watch on Carol. Meanwhile, Sloan was captured on CCTV later that day, repositioning Carol's Mercedes in the car park, so the boot of her car directly faced onto the balcony of her room, inside the Casula complex. Under the cloak of darkness, Sloan packed up Carroll's possessions from the room and transferred them into the car. Parks, meanwhile, was attending a meeting at the Vegas Hotel on Potts Point, seeking to expand his criminal enterprise and meeting with an associate from a nefarious network of local Sydney drug runners. Parks repeatedly tried and failed over the early hours of the morning of July 14th to reach Sloan on his cell phone. That was until 1:42 a.m. when Parks was observed on CCTV speaking on the mobile outside the Vegas Hotel. That call was placed to Sloan, who sped towards Smithfield. In the minutes following, the upline removed a vehicle from the driveway of the Smithfield lockup, and by 2:29 a.m, Carroll's Mercedes, driven by Sloan, was reversed up the driveway. Here, Carroll was bundled into the car and the vehicle set off east, passing through Liverpool, before eventually alighting around 3 a.m. in the bushlands of Sandy Point. Parks left Potts Point around the same time en route to Menai. At trial, jurors heard evidence from the prosecution that Parks stopped at a service station at Moorebank, purchasing 12 litres of petrol. Meanwhile, Carroll's Mercedes was captured on a dashboard camera affixed to a council garbage truck parked up on the edge of Heathcote Road, the entrance to the Sandy Point scrublands. At court, Carroll's harrowing final moments were laid bare. Carroll was killed inside her car, bludgeoned with an aluminium baseball bat and a rock, her limp body retrieved from the vehicle and set alight in a crevice. The killers further doused the Mercedes in petrol and then made their getaway. The duo continued to supply drugs from the premises in Smithfield and Rossmore in the weeks following Carroll's murder. However, homicide detectives were on the scent of Parks and Sloan. A warrant was obtained in early August 2020 for the pair's telephone calls to be intercepted, before Parks was arrested and refused bail for an unrelated matter on August 14th, a month after Carroll's death. On April 7, 2021, Danny Doherty updated a huddled press pack that two men had been charged in connection with Miss Carroll's death after a protracted and complex investigation. Convinced they had their killers in their crosshairs, detectives launched an audacious plan to catch a killer's confession. Chapter 4: Benjamin Parks, Jailbug. In December 2020, Parks sat down with Sutherland Shire and Homicide Police in a prison interview room. There was to be no confession. Parks told police Carroll was down on her luck and, having used pandemic-era changes to superannuation, had withdrew money to invest in his drug business. Parks proclaimed to senior detectives that he, in fact, was an eyewitness to murder and only went to Sandy Point on the pretense to watch Najma get taught a lesson. Parks pointed the blame at Sloan, claiming that he had simply turned on Carroll over money and that he was only there to torch the car. Parks claimed Pockets came around that way with a bat and bludgeoned her to death. He would have hit her 20 times, mate. I was absolutely frozen. However, detectives' new forensic evidence showed Carroll was struck 3 times in the head, contradicting Parks' claims. Police bugged Parks' prison cell. It would prove to be a treasure trove of evidence. Parks was recorded workshopping his version of events with his fellow inmate. It was evidence enough to proceed to trial, committed on murder charges. At Parks' 6 weeks New South Wales Supreme Court trial, Crown Prosecutor Darren Robinson asked the jury why Sloan would have waited for Parks to arrive at the quarry if he was acting alone. He could have killed Miss Carroll and waited for Parks to arrive if the truth is that Parks went there to burn Miss Carroll's car. Why did he need to workshop possible answers to that question? There is a very simple answer to those questions. The truth is that Parks attended Sandy Point in the early hours of the 14th of July 2020 as part of an agreement to kill Miss Carroll. The court heard Parks had spoken with associates before his arrest, advising Sloan was a predator who killed Carroll in front of him and that he was traumatised. The jury in the Parks case, who never knew of Robert Sloan's separate entry plea of guilty in the lead-up, unanimously agreed with the prosecution. A joint enterprise murder, 2 deadbeat bikies facing the rest of their lives behind bars. Chapter 5. Trial and Sentencing. On July 26, 2024, Benjamin Parks was sentenced to 31 years with a minimum term of 21.5 years. Sloan was handed down a sentence of 25 years with a minimum term of 17.5 years on August 2, 2024. During the initial sentencing of Parks, the desolate mother of Najma, Anne Carroll, spoke from the heart. Stoic in the face of evil, she called on the public and civil leaders. Najma was my beloved daughter, who was a loving, generous and courageous spirit. We need to educate our sons and daughters that violence toward women is not acceptable and that culture needs to change. Najma would want us all to continue with love and hope in our hearts. Hope for an end to violence against women. Please follow the Red Heart campaign on social media. We encourage all Australians to take action and end the epidemic of domestic violence and abuse against women. Thanks for watching the channel. Please remember to like, share and comment if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe so you never miss a new release on Pacific Crime TV.